Hi, it's me, Terada. I took this photograph at a hardware store because I was trying to buy things, and I've included it today because I know that somewhere out there must be a figure on how much of the economy revolves around the building and renovation of houses, and it's like people try to invent a perpetual motion machine, and in a way, we've kind of done it, and we're obsessed with it. And then, of course, just as we had that conversation around the need to build more homes, the news came out that suddenly we've run out of timber. And I travel a lot. I go past a lot of ports. I drive through a lot of forests. We've got a lot of logs. We seem to be wanting to get rid of them as quickly as possible overseas. But here, how can we possibly have run out of timber? And then I've gone on to read articles about it, and I can understand how it is that has happened, but why? Why?
I was going to say something which may have been mildly amusing, but I can't remember what it was. So thank you. Paul, how about you?
Kia ora koutou. I'm Paul from Community Finance. That photo, I'm visually impaired, so it would look like slices of a cake for me, or partitioned, perhaps a place like musical chairs, a little bit like our housing market at the moment. Bit of luck of the draw whether you get a place there. Hello, sorry, not a very salubrious background. Hi, greetings.
In many ways, an entirely appropriate background because there will be many people for whom today that is the home in which they are living.
So, Paul, question number one for 18 points.
Yes.
What do you do?
We support the community housing sector. So that's the grassroots sector that deliver housing out in communities. And what we do is we go to the wholesale financial markets and raise money so that they can build more new affordable houses. That's what we do. We're kind of like a matching service, like Tinder for money and houses. But community houses, affordable houses, not for market houses for profit.
For, let's say, I think it's a 34-pointer.
Okay.
I'm going to give you 20 seconds.
Yep.
To explain just how wrecked our rental system is. Are you ready?
When do I start? Okay, ready. I'm ready.
Now.
Okay, so the bar on the graph on the left, which shows $3,514 million, is the money that we pour into a bucket every year, which is lost because there's a hole in the bottom of the bucket. That's how much money we spend every year. Let's spend much less money and build new housing supply. That's the graphs on the right, and fix the actual problem rather than dealing with the symptoms.
I guess it's the gap that is interesting in terms of between people needing rental property that's subsidised through the accommodation supplement or whatever, and the build of rental property for them. And yep. I think that's the extra money that needs to be tipped in to fill that gap, to bridge people out of that spend to nowhere.
Name the 5 pillars of Labour's housing announcement last week.
Oh, well, I think stay out was pillar number 1 for speculators. I think pillar number 2 was we're going to introduce a capital gains tax and call it something different. Pillar 3 was no, I can't name 5. Basically, I'm struggling. I think it's great that they did what they did, and it's a lovely first baby step. But let's encourage them to keep walking and do some less talking.
So $3.8 billion to accelerate.
Oh, thank you. That's right.
Accelerate housing supply in the short to medium term.
Yeah, but that kind of was going to happen anyway. So I kind of didn't count that as a pillar. That was kind of re-announcing something that had already been announced. So yes, that's great. And we need that because we're underfunding chronically our local government, so they can't provide the infrastructure that we need. So someone had to do something.
Fiona Rader, are you more up to date with the government's housing announcements than Mr. Gilberd here?
Well, I'm up to date with the caterwauling from the landlord sector. So, of course, interest the tax that you could claim your interest payments on has been taken away, and so there is a conversation there around every other business has the right to do that. And actually, maybe the conversation is we're taking what for many people was considered to be a business and reorientating it back to what it actually is. And the provision or the right to own a house is, is it really a business?
That's such a good point, actually, because it can't be a business if you're over leveraged to the point where you owe. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that because we've got good examples of very high-powered businessmen who are well over leveraged. One recently at the head of the United States. Should it be a business? I think that we hear a lot from landlords, but we actually hear a lot of sensationalism in the media. We don't hear from landlords who are really good landlords.
And the other people we don't hear things from are actually quite a lot of landlords who don't want to say they're landlords.
There's only 1/3 of independent rental properties that are in the rental market that are actually operating, let's say, according to market principles, where someone comes along and rents the property and can afford to pay the rent on their own, and the landlord owns the property and rents it to them. So the system clearly is not working if 2/3 of the entire rental market is being propped up and supported by the government. So they're kidding themselves if they're saying that's the private market working really well, because that's just bullshit.
Does that include the accommodation supplement? Because
that's most of the accommodation supplement. So there's $3.5 billion a year going out in subsidies from the government, which, let's face it, is money gone from the system. That's not adding any new supply to the system. There's no new houses. That's propping up landlords and paying rent all over the country.
I had another word too, and it started with C. It's a longer word. Rhymes with luck. Cluster is the first one.
I think there's 2 words.
Well,
Hyphenated.
this is a good conversation. Is it hyphenated? I've always written it and pronounced it in my head as a single word.
I think you're right, actually. No, I just picture it. It is. It's a single word.
It's like pepper pot. The joyful team at Kāinga Ora came up with another C word, and they called it cluster pot, which was their definition of putting groupings of houses of a similar tenure together in clusters.
Oh, so the opposite of pepper pot.
Well, they were arguing it had an uncanny similarity, but I would agree with you, Radar. It's not at all the same thing.
Yeah, I think they probably mean melting pot.
That was literally their technical term to try and get around people like you, Paul, saying that they needed to pepper pot different tenures, right?
That's exactly right. But what they actually wanted to do was cluster them together in large groupings of monotenure.
What I don't understand is the secret society that sets the rents around the country.
Yeah.
The welfare reform group suggested that the government actually just set the rents. This is what you should be paying. But actually,
that's a good idea.
The secret society of Ma and Pa's and the things that they buy into, such as the Property Investors Association, are they rorting the market? Are they setting rents and driving some sort of cabal of price fixing? He's like, you might think that, but I couldn't possibly comment.
That's so mean.
There's 830 points on the table for that one, Paul, if you want to answer.
Well, here's an idea, just for starters, right? So we've got this idea that we're going to, and there's some people doing it, we're just going to remove ourselves from that game as the community housing sector and get back into delivering affordable rental products. And what affordable means is it's actually affordable for the people who live in that home. So that's 1/3 of your gross household income spent on your rent if you want to rent a house, or your mortgage if you want to own a house. And so there's ways we're looking at decoupling what we do from the market by, for example, removing the increases in rent completely from the market and saying, hey, let's just adjust it by the consumer price index, which typically runs at half of the normal rent increases. So the longer you live in that home, the greater the subsidy and the lower your rent will be over time. So those are the mechanisms, because we don't want to play anymore in this rampant commercial, financial, extractive, bottom line profit market. It's not winning. No one wins from that. So we're really trying to be creative and innovative and do other things and get out of that space, because that's not working for our society.
Can I provide both a point of relevance to Fiona's question on the cabal, and also just declare a conflict of interest in the conversation, in that I currently have a house that I am renting out. It was my old house. And when we went to set the rental price on it, how did we do it? I went online, I looked at what all the rental prices were in my neighborhood, and I thought, oh my God, how does anyone afford this? And I looked at what the rental stock was, and then I went, you know what? I'm going to charge what I thought was a reasonable kind of rent, which was below a lot of what the other ones were, and rented it out that way, because I looked around at the neighborhood that I'd been living in for the last 15 years, and I could not understand how anyone could afford the rents that were being asked for what were a lot of pretty crappy properties.
One of the things the community housing sector used to do, which it needs to do more of now, which worked really well, so let's do more of that more often, was they used to try and strike the rents at 80% or less of the prevailing market conditions. Now, things have got so out of whack now. I mean, your average key worker, your cleaner, your administrator, your teacher can't live anywhere near where they work for the very reason you've just said. And so that's why we'd prefer if we were calculating rents based on what people earn, because it's the only, as you've said, it's the only relevant measure is what can I afford. And internationally, the benchmark is around a third of your gross income is a sustainable amount of rent. After that, you have an event shock, something happens, which it always does in life, and you spiral into the chaos of poverty, really.
I think in the States, is it one paycheck? Is it the one paycheck away or two paychecks away? It's very, very, and I'd say we'd be the same here.
2 meals.
Yep.
You know, I'm discovering there's nothing funny about housing. Are you sure we should be making jokes?
Paul, can you please tell us something funny about housing?
The funny thing about housing is, from our perspective, and obviously I do look at it from a financial lens, but there's never been more money. There is money everywhere. There's money raining out of the sky. We've just secured 3 amazing investors from the KiwiSaver sector who are putting millions into community housing. There's now $77 billion of New Zealand money in KiwiSaver funds.
Wow.
So we don't have it. We don't even need to go overseas to look for money to fix our housing crisis. And remember, the government has a thing called a reserve bank, so it can just write money to fix this problem. What we have is a problem of political will. That is, do you want to solve the housing crisis or don't you? And it's really that simple. And so it's great to see the private sector stepping up and getting involved. But it is quite ironic, a little bit funny, that we've got so much money and we're now in the middle of the worst housing crisis in our history, because join the dots, people. The solution's right in front of you.
So, Paul, you're the dating game.
Yeah.
Have you given any thought to dating ma and pa investors? Enticing them away from their housing partners, creating a context for them having a little fling in another sector that's far easier, will be a better return for them. Good heartfelt stuff like today day. You can just see him glowing as she talks about his.
Oh, well, I was thinking about like how much easier it would be if you could invest, because there's no point investing money in a big Australian bank or anything like that, having it sitting there. And for a lot of people, they want it, we've all seen, for a lot of people, that fear of money, their retirement savings disappearing. So it's somewhere like, your organisation, Paul, where people could go, it's all care, no responsibility. I can invest in this. I'm essentially a de facto landlord by the fact that, I have invested in homes for people, but I don't have to worry about literally anything other than opening my email to see how well it's doing.
And people love that, because they lost so much money in the collapse of those financial institutions that had D and E ratings, but no one read the prospectus before they put their 500,000 or the 800,000 into them. So it's not like you have to write the book in terms of getting. You could probably just woo them with flowers and a bit of a meal.
Well, we can do better than that with our dating arrangements, because we can give them a really great financial return as well as the feel good. You see, that's the beautiful thing about it. It's not like a creepy dating service. It's a really quite a good dating service. So yeah, love your thinking. So effectively, the problem we've got at the moment is that we are only dealing with these people that are called wholesale investors. Now, those are like big institutional outfits. Love your idea about opening up the dating game to mum and pup investors, and that's coming soon.
Can I just say, I'm just getting a bit tingly, so it's really working for me.
You haven't got like a power lead and a kind of like a leak there somewhere in the room?
If you thought Adrian or had forgotten anything, what would it be?
Remember, we're going to see, with the baby boomers coming through, the largest wealth transfer in human history over the next 20 or 30 years. And also remember, in the New Zealand context, where did a lot of those homeowners get their equity in their home from? Because it came from a brilliant scheme which the New Zealand government used to do. There were a couple of them. One was called the State Advances Loans, which was fixed low interest loans to help people get their first home. Great idea. Hey, why don't we get that out of the box, dust it off and do it again? And the other thing that they did was they allowed you to capitalise the family benefit. And that allowed many of our ancestors, those of us who have the privilege of having had a bank of mum and dad to help us get our first home, that bank of mum and dad came from historic government interventions providing low-cost opportunities for people to get onto the ownership ladder. So those gifts are intergenerational gifts that work both ways. For those who are lucky enough to own their homes, they're leveraging off those historic arrangements in many occasions. But for intergenerational renters, the opposite applies. And so we're meeting people every day almost for whom the possibility of home ownership is not even in their universe of available choices, because nobody they know has ever done anything other than rent. And I mentioned in a piece that Simon Wilson did in the Herald on the weekend, that's basically asset stripping the poor. So if you are in a situation paying rent, as many social housing renters are, for 30 years, after 30 years, you could have paid off a mortgage and you would then have an intergenerational family asset. Instead, what we do is we keep those poor people poor by making them rent forever, and I call that asset stripping the poor. And there's something fundamentally wrong when you're doing that to your low and moderate income households, because if you realise you're doing that, then morally, once you realise you're doing that, you should bloody well stop doing that.
Yeah, and talking of baby boomers, we're a country where all these old white folk are going to be relying on young brown folk who they've stripped out their whānau, their families of them, just like you say, denied them access to education, oral health care, all sorts of stuff. So they're not going to be in good, high tax paying jobs. And, when we're at the stage where 50 old age pensioners rely on two workers, and those two workers are brown, someone's got to think something's going to go wrong if we don't start investing in young people and young brown people and their families, and the hope of housing and finding somewhere to belong in this country when all they get often is a country that doesn't very much like them. I think 1 in 5 Māori now are born in Australia. Yeah, Mozzies. Maybe we could bring them home too.
Well,
voluntarily.
Fiona. Maybe it's just a way of us sort of, as a very small country, colonising Australia. They've got a lot of resources. We could just, we don't have an army big enough to take them over. So we're moving closer. I think, is it 2 millimeters a year? We're moving closer, and we're sending a whole lot of folk over there to infiltrate. Remember, because we had all those politicians that suddenly couldn't become politicians in Australia because it turned out they were secret New Zealanders. I thought, they've caught us. That was our grand plan all along.
That's so mean.
The biggest impediment for so many people is that deposit. and it goes up. You cannot save in a year what that deposit has gone up over this period of time, and you're looking at that and thinking that there's got to be a better way. And yet at the same time, the last few years, the markets have been fizzing at the massive profits those Australian banks have made from the mortgage industry. So there's been money taken out of the whole sector, left, right, and centre.
Something that Te Rara said, it's like, why do you think, or do you know, why is it that the Labour government, the party of the people, left-leaning, supposed to be looking after us, why do you think they have such a problem with the community housing sector?
Oh, can I have a go at that one?
That was for you, Paul. That's like worth 23.5 points.
What a great question, Fiona. Why is that? So I've got a working theory at the moment. Basically, it comes, if you dial it right back to a deep-set old 1950s Labour philosophical position. If you're not the state, you're not a valid actor in the play. You have no place on the stage in the housing drama if you're not the state. So even the community housing sector is viewed bizarrely as the evil profit-making private sector because it's not the government. Now, this is really, really peculiar because our leaders in this government are perpetuating this myth. You hear it in Parliament almost every week. Oh, the national government keeps selling off state houses. Now, that's fascinating because if you dig underneath that, what you realise is, for example, in Tauranga, the national government sold a portfolio of Housing New Zealand houses to the IHC, a charity, which is now called Accessible. Every single one, bar a few that fell over, of those houses is still in the system and still servicing the needs of social rental households on the housing register. Not one of those houses has been lost from the system.
Paul, do you think that's a sort of a pendulum swing back too far the other way, simply from that kind of neoliberalism of the Labour government that's, of what was it, 84, 87, where they suddenly, everything was dispatched. The state won't have anything, get rid of it all. And now they're actually going, oh, no, we must hold on to things.
Yeah, I think there's been a deep reaction to neoliberal economics as we've all realised the bullshit of trickle down, because it just doesn't happen. But I think there is evidence to show that there's a better way. And I think one of the greatest manifestations in the housing system of that, and the Prime Minister graciously said this herself when she came to the opening of one of the facilities that we financed through community finance. She said, you guys, this was, in this case, the Salvation Army was the community housing provider. She said, you guys simply do it better than we do. And what she's talking about there is the software, not the hardware being the house, the software being the services like the financial capability and the financial literacy and the counselling and the other things to help people get their lives in order and get back up on their feet. So she very graciously said, well, you actually do it better than we do. We, in that case, meaning the agencies of the state, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and Kāinga Ora. So I think there's glimmers of hope there. They'd written to the minister, and the minister had checked with the MSD, and of course, no one had applied for housing on Stewart Island because they all know there is none. There is no state-run housing on Stewart Island. So why would you catch a boat to Invercargill to go to a Ministry of Social Development office to register on the housing register on Stewart Island when you know there are no houses available? So there's invisible problems all over the place, and that's why we need communities to drive their own solutions. That's the way forward.
You asked before, how can we make jokes about the housing situation? Well, I think we're just looking at one right there.
What's that?
The circularity of the fact that you can't get a hotel room because they're full of people who can't get a house. So you just go and get a house from Airbnb, which isn't available to someone. So they're in a hotel room, and it's
Paul, you mentioned the Tauranga properties going to accessible properties. I'd like to know, where did the land for those houses come from? I'd like to know if it got confiscated under the Public Works Act from
goodness
local.
Me. Yeah, you're opening up a can of worms there, I can tell you, because get in there.
Oh, they're one of those big camp-sized cans.
So let's go there then, right? So the other big story that's not really being told is the abundance of church land across the whole country, which is available for building houses on. And the answer to your question is most of it came from gifted Māori land.
Yeah.
So those churches really need to look at themselves, and I'm a member of one of them, so I'm speaking heavily to my church at the moment about, well, the rainy day has arrived. If we were saving for a rainy day upon which to do the work of the church on the spare land that we have, it's here. Time to start building houses, people. And the same applies for a lot of that land actually in Tauranga, which is actually, my understanding is subject to a whole lot of negotiations, because pretty much the whole of downtown Tauranga was confiscated questionably, and that's right where the CBD is. And so what are we doing about that? I think that's a fair point.
I know the only land they think they own or actually own is the reclaimed land for the port. And God knows there were so many protestations about that. And you'd have to deconsecrate that as well as the churches if you're going to build. See, housing can be funny.
It can. Well, it can. So just to get back to that slide, you know that $3,500 million, I say $3,500 million because it sounds bigger than 3 billion, but it's the same thing. I think it would be really great if we could take some of that money, which is kind of the point of the right-hand part of that slide, and use it instead of spending it on rent. Let's capitalise it and turn it into new housing supply. Now, there's a radical idea. I think one of the things that many people miss is that people keep falling off the cliff and into the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, which is reflected by the two bottom bars there, the public housing and the transitional housing, because there's nowhere affordable for them to live. And so if we created affordable places for people to live, which is new affordable housing supply, we would actually be addressing the root cause of the problem rather than constantly dealing with the symptoms.
You spent the whole time going, $1 billion. How much is $1 billion? Is it 1 million million? Is it 1,000 million? Is it, and by the time you tried to figure it out, you've actually missed the point of what the conversation was about, and you've moved on to something else. So 3,500 millions is a lot of millions.
And the next game that we're going to play,
Yes.
this is the game affectionately known as What the Fuck Does That Mean?
Yep.
Where I read you something really interesting and you have, again, 20 seconds to explain it.
Yeah.
Are you ready, sir?
I'm ready.
Like neoliberalism and globalization, financialization has emerged as one of the most popular buzzwords across social sciences, aiming at describing, in one way or another, phenomena associated with the expansion of finance in contemporary capitalism. Despite the variety of definitions attached to the term over time, Krippner's definition of financialization is a pattern of accumulation in which profits accrue primarily through financial channels. And Epstein's definition is the increasing role of financial motives, financial markets, financial actors and financial institutions have become the most common denominations of the word.
What?
I think it's the difference. Financialization in the housing context is really simple. It's the difference between the head and the heart. It's the difference between a house and a home. And I think we all know what we need more of.
Brains.
I'm just writing points out for that, actually, because
points. Yep.
I've got points. 3,500 millions, because that was a great thing.
The next game we're going to play is Let's Mark Bernard Hickey for his assessment of our housing crisis. I'm going to give you 5 points from his recent article, and I want you to mark them out of 10.
I didn't read it.
Don't think it matters.
Okay.
Build
Okay,
prefabs.
Build prefabs? Yeah, 10.
Rethink the accommodation supplement.
10.
Support community housing.
10. It's just a no-brainer. Just do it. Move on.
And finally, and possibly the most obvious, turn girls into builders.
Yeah, 10, of course.
Sounds like he's nailed it.
That was not Bernard Hickey's article. That was Simon Wilson's article you're quoting to me.
I thought they were the same person.
I'm
don't
going to
say
give
that
you
out loud.
points, Brennan. I'm giving you points for that answer. Seven points for Brennan. I don't know if the host can get points, but that
was
is
good.
the funniest thing.
I'd like Paul to explain, if they're not the same person, what are 3 key differences?
Well, I've met Simon.
Who is the one person around the world that you think is the most likely to wreak havoc in the next 3 years?
Ooh, havoc. Probably the buffoon who's running Britain.
Hmm.
Just because of his astonishing incompetence. Generally, I think he's just going to stick his foot somewhere it doesn't belong, and cause an enormous big mess.
But he just solved institutional racism.
Yeah, exactly.
And so finally, Paul, who's the one person you think of globally who's going to make a really positive difference in the next 3 years? Or there's an alternate question to that. Who was your childhood hero?
Oh, childhood hero.
I knew you'd pick that one.
I think that's the one I'm going to go for. And it was definitely Wonder Woman.
Do you think Wonder Woman could train as a builder?
I think she should definitely be a builder. I think she's got all the requisite skills, especially the truth lasso, which could do well in Wellington.
So she'd be more a supervisor. Yeah.
Don't forget to cry a tear, a little crocodile tear, for all those poor property-owning people who've just banked $60,000 million of untaxed capital gains. Also referred to in the Simon Wilson article, $60,000 million of untaxed capital gains for property owners. People need to know that stuff because it's just so obviously wrong that when you're trying to run a country and run public services and run social infrastructure and one group is excluded to that magnitude of untaxed profit, that's how seriously fucked up the system is.
How much of that 6,000? How much? 60? How much of all of that untaxed property gain then went to what I'm going to call then mom and pop homeowners who then use that to either move up or to help their kids go into another property, or took that money and invested it back into or spent it back in the community through shops or whatever it may be that enabled the kind of the business to continue through the community. Like we're saying it as if that was all just a whole lot of greedy speculators, when for a lot of people, that, you know what I mean? Again, do we risk tarring that entire sector with the same kind of brush that you're tarring every single landlord, which includes yourself as landlords? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I could be over egging the pudding, but
you know what I mean? Because I just think, that there's a huge amount of small businesses who sell all kinds of things that people have gone out and spent some of that money on, including funding their retirement. So yeah, and boo to the IRD, who it seems, if you look at the figures, aren't pursuing this as actively as they could. When you look at the number of places that have paid that capital gains tax that should have paid it and haven't.
Yep.
Negative 18 points for your question, Radar. I didn't understand it at all. But Paul, did you understand it, and do you have an answer?
Look, I agree. I think it's dangerous to tar everyone with the same brush, but I do think we need to tax appropriately in that space. I think we've got a money distribution issue in New Zealand within the system, and that it's very much warped by the housing system, where 2/3 of our entire country's wealth is sitting. So I think we do have a structural issue which needs to be realigned, and I'm good on the government for starting that process.
If I was to say that capital gains come from a future iteration of our society and future iterations of ourselves who earn the same amount as ourselves but are forced to pay more money for houses, Would I be correct?
Yeah, I think there's a certain extent to which we could be seen to be eating our children's future.
That's a great line. Right, what six? I'm going to get 6,000 millions for that line. 6,000 millions.
Yeah, I endorse that. Same. Yeah.
Thank you. You judges are generous.
What I want to know, and it's kind of unrelated, is if housing keeps going up so that city councils get a bigger rates take, why do they keep increasing our rates?
Yeah.
Chronic underinvestment in infrastructure over a number of years, and a race to the bottom of council spending amongst people who wish to be elected to council.
So in that case, we're shoring up our future generations' infrastructure, but they won't be able to plug into it because they're not going to have a house. Right.
1 million points for Te Radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Great.
Yeah.
And an appointment at the eye clinic.
I think Shamabeel said it really, really well recently. He said that generation rent is about to flex its muscle in New Zealand because it's becoming the majority and not the minority. And I think if people in politics don't wake up pretty soon to that group, they'll pay the price, and so they should.
What's the median house price? Is it like 756,000 there?
Whoa, what are the chances of that? Look what I just wrote. Look what I had just written down. Yes. I had just written 756, actually to the power of 7.
I only got 3.
But
a dollar sign.